Tomorrow, bring your Bedford Reader, bring your Bedford Reader. Matt, bring your Bedford Reader. Luke, Bedford Reader. Lexi, Bedford Reader. Don't forget it. You'll forget it. I'm not even gonna bother reminding you. Forgotten anything in your life? That's impressive. I don't agree with that. I think you have. So tomorrow, Bedford Reader articles. You want to have those read. We'll do the quiz at the beginning. It's multiple choice. It should be a fairly quick process to go through it. And I think I mentioned this yesterday. We're not like setting up two sides of the room. Okay, all those in favor of this article sit over there and over there. Now we fight. But it's looking at two articles with the same issue. Obviously, multiple two different viewpoints with it. But from that argumentative standpoint, we started going through those logical fallacies yesterday. That's the lens that we're going to look at through the perspective. What is it about their argument, the way that they set it up, that you do like? What is it about their argument that not personally you don't like, but from an argumentative standpoint that you don't like? How could that be helpful, useful to you moving forward as we get into some argumentative essays and ideas and whatnot? So that'll be the way that we're going to take a look at it. For today, we do have a few more. I think we hit non sequitur yesterday, right? So we only have two more to do after that, so it'll be quick. And then we'll take a look at the exam prompt that you picked up coming in from last year's test, so you can see something a little bit more recent than what we were looking at on Tuesday. Monday, Catcher in the Rye, nothing new there. Chapter 16. So, go through again. We don't have to keep count of how many times he says, "Well, crony, I don't have." So that one, if you want to keep count.
Well, now it's too late.
Just go back, reread. It's always good.
You're lucky if you get one time.
It's important.
Which phrases?
Yeah.
Starting to get on your
I said it.
nerves. Name them.
I don't.
Crummy.
Yeah.
Growing up, there was a church down the road, and the minister's last name was Crummy. It was like, I think it was CRU, maybe MMY, like not spelled the same way as Crummy, but every week, another Crummy sermon.
I appreciate the bumpy.
What was the challenger joke that you told last year?
You can't introduce it that way, that ruins the punchline.
Yeah, but I just don't remember.
I'm not going to tell you now.
Oh my goodness.
We'll have to wait till later.
Okay, now we go.
Oh, you won't know when it's coming. Did you find that one insensitive?
No, it's just really.
Okay. Some people find that one insensitive.
It kind of is, but that's just my
We'll find out whenever we make reference to it.
Oh no, we were laughing about Walkingtons and cool angels.
That joke is funny, but
Speaking of bad, logical fallacies are bad when you use them in your DRQs. One of those would be equivocation. Abby, did you hear about the kids? I think it was Chartiers Valley. Ken and McMillan, they're taking lunches away from kids if they don't have enough money in their school balances. But Chartiers Valley, I think it was Chartiers Valley. A couple kids were, how folks will get arrested for doing stupid things, such as like throwing rocks at cars and all that kind of stuff. Well, these kids were taking, I think it was landscaping, I can't think of the term, like timbers, and they tied a rope to it, and they hung it from an overpass, and they were swinging it above cars. So that as you were driving, it looked like this timber was going to hit you, but they had it just high enough that it would go above the car, so it wouldn't actually hit you. But they didn't take something into account. What also goes on highways? Trucks. So a tractor trailer comes down the highway, timber's coming down, what does it do? Hits the truck, cracks the windshield, crushes the windshield, goes into the truck, does not hit the driver, went in the passenger side, so Kaylee, the driver, is okay. But unfortunately, the one kid, I think he was like 17, he was holding on to the rope for the timber. He tied it around his arm. So what happened when the truck kept going? It pulled his arm off. More disturbing than that is the fact that they arrested the truck driver.
yeah, that's what we call instant.
Armed robbery. And that's equivocation, where you shift the meaning of a term. So when the joke gets said, and Nicole's still processing. You think of armed robbery so far as a gun, but in this case, rip the person's arm off, which is totally made up. So when you shift the definition of a key term within an argument, it could be kind of punny in nature like that one, or it could be equivocation here, and you got a transitive property, right in getting utilized. Hot dogs are better than nothing. Kaylee's seen this one before, but that's okay. Nothing is better than steak. So it doesn't matter if you like hot dogs or hamburgers. Hot dogs are better than nothing. Or you could rephrase that by saying, what, hot dogs are better than, yeah, like, well, not necessarily better than anything, but better than, if you're the Jodes, starving. Like, I would rather have a hot dog, regardless of what you view about the ingredients of the hot dog, you'd rather have a hot dog than not have any food whatsoever. But nothing is better than steak. In that case, I'm going, whatever you could throw out there, you're not going to find anything that is better than steak. Therefore, hot dogs are better than steak. If you view nothing as being the same thing in both sentences, oops, that's bad. That would make sense. But the term of nothing has shifted. It's gone from meaning the absence of food to whatever kind of food you can think of. It's not going to be better than steak. When it comes to arguments like the legalization of marijuana, some folks will go, "Hey, it's a natural substance. Naturally, it should be allowed." They're playing with the term naturally. They mean two different things, but by putting them in close proximity, they're allowing that to be a reason, therefore, why it should be allowed. So equivocation does probably tend to be unintended a lot of times. You can be sneaky with it and use it in some ways, but if you shift the meaning of a key term within your argument, that argument might not be logical anymore. Question or no? You're just thinking about your arm and not getting pulled out of your.
I wasn't yesterday and my dad her arms like the dog on the stage and told him, "Why are you watching?"
Last one that we're going to do here is ad hominem, another Latin phrase which means to the man. It's an argument that attacks the character of the person but completely ignores the argument. Now, there can be people that you do not like for a variety of reasons, or there can be people that you have had bad experiences with and having good reasons to dislike, distrust. But if you solely attack the credibility or the character of a person and ignore their argument and any logical reasoning that could be there, any validity to there, now you would be guilty of ad hominem. So, you couldn't pick up a book and go, East of Eden, Steinbeck, I already read The Pearl, I already read The Grapes of Wrath. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to read it. He's crummy. You haven't even begun to look at the book. You're making the judgment ad hominem based on what you know about the person, not based on the book itself. So you can't simply go, that movie's not any good because that actor's in it. Unless you've seen the movie, you can't actually state whether it's going to be good or not. So Mr. Kane does not know a thing about American literature because he's a male chauvinist pig. That second half of the statement could be true, but that has nothing to do with whether or not we'd be knowledgeable about American literature. I'm the one on the right. Okay. Any questions about any of those? All right, looking at this now. We want to make sure when it comes to our arguments and now we don't get into the logical fallacies. Who's crying? For this one?
No idea. I don't know.
Without even reading the prompt, and most of you probably have already started to, or you did when you picked it up, but just looking at the paper, the setup, the structure of it, what makes this one very different from the one that we looked at on Tuesday? It's brief. There's not a passage that goes along with it. Last time, we had passage here, 2 columns. You had to read that stuff, then go back. The DRQ, the argument question, it could be as brief as this. It could have a passage that would go along with it. You don't really know. I would say chances are you're probably going to have something more like this. Not because last year says 2016, so therefore all years are going to be that way. But they haven't completely abandoned having a passage like you did with Huxley and Orwell, but this is becoming more common. And I think I know why, and we'll get into that later on within the year when we start looking at more of these. But either way, the setup is still the same. You still have an argument that's going to be presented to you. The nice thing about it is they tell you what the argument is right away, as opposed to before, the other one said Postman's assertion. Then you had to read the article to figure out what Postman's assertion was. There's less deciphering, trying to figure out what is the position that you're going to defend, refute, qualify. What people might not like about it is before there was the passage to read, so if you didn't have any ideas immediately about the topic, the passage might help you brainstorm and think of some things. In this case, where are you going to get your ideas from? It's all coming from you. So, Irish author Oscar Wilde, many of you familiar with, if was it 8th grade going to 9th grade was the summer reading for Importance of Being Earnest, observed disobedience in the eyes of anyone who has read history is man's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion. So a lot of times you'll at least get some kind of quote or concept that gets introduced. You haven't received the prompt yet, because the prompt is going to be the second part down here. Where now, Wilde claims that disobedience is a valuable human trait and it promotes social progress. So key term. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Wilde's claims are valid. Use appropriate examples from your reading, experience, or observation to support your argument. So the last time we did one, it was telling us you have to pull from contemporary society. This one is saying your reading, experience, or observations. Those tend to be the standard words that they'll use as to where your argument comes from. So that can certainly mean a lot of things, and depending on experiences that you have had, could mean different things for you. So you could have personal experiences. It mentions readings, so there's certainly literature that you could take a look at. You are under no obligation whatsoever to make reference to Oscar Wilde as a writer or a playwright, so it doesn't mean the Importance of Being Earnest has to make its way into the essay. Observations, kind of an ambiguous term. Observations can certainly mean things that you have seen, witnessed, events that are going on in current society. It also could be observations that you have of history, so you could certainly go with historical examples. The plan is to come up with not just as many examples as you can, but the best quality examples to prove whether or not you think his claims are valid. So, Abby, you're still going, I don't like this one. Any thought into whether you think he is right or wrong? Not worried about examples, but yes, I agree. No, I disagree.
I
Disagree? Okay. And again, the decision that you make so far as your argument has no bearing on the success of the prompt. It's all about how that argument gets built up, the examples that you use. They're not going to go, this person disagreed, they're getting a 2. Whether you agree, whether you disagree, score could still be anywhere from that, not 0 to 9, but 1 to 9. So disagree. Any other thoughts? Agree? Agree? And then there also could kind of even be, I might agree. It uses the term to an extent to which you believe his claims are valid. You might think that, yes, disobedience is a good thing or is an appropriate thing so long as you don't cross a certain line or threshold, then you've gone too far. And so in some ways you could even kind of make that position. Okay, so yeah, you could certainly go excessive disobedience is not going to be appropriate. Not trying to change your viewpoint.
Yeah,
but,
that's what I would want to a point.
Okay, so you can see instances when disobedience would help with like human progress.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume, just for the sake of what we're doing here, that we're all under agreement with that. What we have established from an argument standpoint is now our claim. We have a claim that disobedience helps do what? Helps promote human progress. All right, so over here I'm going to go claim. What was the R word they also use with disobedience? Okay, so you have disobedience and maybe rebellion might kind of come into it as well. Disobedience, rebellion, promotes human progress. If I'm going to make a claim in an argument, what do I need to have for it? I need to have support, I need to have evidence. Evidence is going to lead to my claim. So, off top of head, past, present, things you've read, things you have, witnessed, experienced, what would be any examples of disobedience that has promoted human progress? You could also think about what are examples of disobedience or rebellion that have gone too far, or it does not happen. Okay, so 1776, founding fathers, all that stuff.
And then kind of going off of that, one that went too far was the French Revolution.
So Robespierre won't quite work quite as well. Guillotines are bad. Mental note. What else? Olivia? Okay. I'm not trying to make this sound like an obvious question. Does it become unacceptable once you have like human suffering, death involved? Is it the mere persecution of persons' beliefs that kind of goes too far?
Yeah, like, I think it goes with like the French Revolution too, like persecuting certain groups.
Okay. So with French Revolution, persecution is going to be when it goes too far, and then like Nazi Germany, you would be saying would kind of fall under that umbrella as well. Okay, Jack, I think you had a hand up earlier. Okay, or American Revolution. What else? That must have knocked out a lot of options that people were thinking about. Lexi, you're going American Revolution?
Yeah.
Founding fathers are very important to you. That's good. Good old Stamp Act. Boston Tea Party.
Maybe the Industrial Revolution.
Or in what way? Just because that's a different kind of revolution than we would think of with American and French.
It's because instead of sticking to agriculture,
Okay. And a key term with the argument we have over here is human progress. When it comes to American Revolution, human progress, probably think about freedoms, liberties. Industrial Revolution, there's certainly still human progress taking place, but it's more so, a lifestyle, economic, technological aspects that are taking place. And so kind of shifting viewpoint from agriculture to something else. Okay. And when we say civil rights, we usually think like 1950s, 1960s. Not that we have to come up with something that counteracts, each term that we come up with. We mentioned French Revolution, Nazi Germany, persecution to kind of counteract American Revolution is going too far. Just because I'm thinking of the horror, what could you argue with Industrial Revolution when it has gone too far? You go, like, imperialism in general, where if you are going outside of your natural, I don't know if habitat's going to be the right word, but you are making other people suffer in order to advance, again, that's where you've gone too far. So that persecution, suffering aspect could be something that might look at. Certainly civil rights movement we would have. In today's world, certainly still dealing with issues of racism and whatnot. We're not really civil rights movement, but what is current event movement that we would say? Uh-oh, we need to get more involved with current events. Carol, did you have? Yeah. I think a lot of times we do tend to focus, and this is a good thing, on historical examples, because it's something that certainly is going to come up whether you're in AP, US history, Euro, whatever kind of history and whatnot. These have certainly been beaten into our head over and over and over again. However, it's good to be able to get as many different viewpoints or as many different examples as you can so you don't fall into one trap. If a person really likes going to the historical aspect, fine. But the concern would be what happens if you get a prompt like the one we looked at on Tuesday where you had to pull from contemporary society. Now you might be having a little bit of an issue as to what's going on. I made reference to Canon Macmillan. Did anyone know about the lunch lady at Canon Mac? Canon Macmillan in the senior high and as well as the elementary schools, it's like us where you have your card with your food balance and whatnot on it. If your balance, I think it's $25. If it goes beyond $25 in the red, if you are in elementary school, maybe even middle, you don't get a hot lunch. So if you went to pick up the chicken nuggets, but they find out your balance is too low, they'll give you like peanut butter and jelly or cheese sandwich or something like that in its place. So you still get lunch, but it's not hot lunch. If you're in the high school, so you're beyond elementary, middle school, if you go to purchase a lunch and you're beyond that $25 in the red mark, they don't replace it with a cold lunch. They just don't replace it. They'll take your food from you so you don't get fed. And the lunch lady quit over it. She's like, I'm not taking away a kid's food, child's food. I'm not going to tell a person cannot eat. So in some ways, she is certainly being disobedient, or I guess not disobedient because she quit rebelling, where it could be a simple example as that, which is going to have more local, regional relevance than something on a national scale. But she feels that people are getting harmed by not being able to get the food that they want, or in her mind, the food that they need. So it can be something as simple as that. My guess would be last year, almost 400,000 students took the AP English Language and Composition exam. So relatively close to 500,000. I have no idea how many would have done this, but I'm thinking a fair number went with the American Revolution, and I would think a fair number also went with the Civil Rights Movement, and then as well as some other things. That does not take away from the credibility of these examples. So we can't go, Kaylee, everyone and their mother wrote about those things. Your essay is not going to pass now. We're sick and tired of reading about it. That's not going to be the case. But what is going to be the difference between this being inadequate, appropriate, or effective evidence for that overall claim? What do you have to do as a writer to keep it up here compared to all the other hundreds of thousands of people who might be writing about similar topics? Okay, so basically detail and focus, which generally, like evidence focus, if you maintain those things, you're usually in pretty good shape. Yeah, I would certainly say that's one of those things. And or two of those. And that can be difficult because in some cases people will say the American Revolution or the Civil Rights Movement, and the assumption is you know why that's an example of disobedience or rebellion that does promote human progress. I don't have to go into detail because people understand that. But you do have to go into detail. You do have to explain that. And that is why it is very important that you provide reasoning. The reasoning is what will connect the evidence to the claim. And we don't always provide that. And a lot of times we don't need to provide that. Mr. Kane, I didn't come to school yesterday. I had a fever. Well, why didn't you come to school? Why wouldn't you come to school if you had a fever? But why not come to school? Okay. Why else?
That person was getting
Nope, not in the DRQ it's not. You're under the impression that if I know you had a fever, that means, number one, I'm sick. I'm probably contagious. I could get the people around me ill. I'm not going to be functioning at chief capacity. I very well could be sweating like crazy and leaving sticky, wet residue in the seat that the next person, next period, does not want to have. I'm going to be getting up all the time to go to the bathroom because I feel like I might throw up. So I have made your life better and the whole class a better experience by not being here yesterday. Thank you. That's the reasoning. Now, so the reasoning doesn't always get included by folks because there's the assumption you know what I mean. but with an argument you cannot do that. So now we have to go into specifics for any of those things as to, okay, this is why, how that disobedience improved human progress. So, for the American Revolution, how did that improve human progress? What would be now the specific details about that piece of evidence that you would use to substantiate, basically a whole body paragraph? Why is the American Revolution a good thing for human progress?
We can say how there's disobedience got the goal of the lowest and the ones and they ended up getting it. And in their independence and freedom, it's like a pretty good country.
So, independence. Independence from whom?
Say for or
From whom?
from.
Okay, and so we'll hear England, Great Britain, and then why is that a big deal? Like, why did we need independence from them, or it, I guess, as a country?
There was like social progress because they went from monarchy to more democracy.
Okay, I'm going to go to a new page because we're going to get very messy. So we said independence, freedom, check. What was it? Government progress that you said, or okay?
So, like,
Went from a monarchy to complete democracy, but we certainly use that term. Okay, political progress. Why else? Which has now been utilized by other nations as well. They don't have as many monarchies as there used to be. Queen of England, what does she really do? Politically, not a whole lot. Whereas, King George had a little more say, in the matter than Queen Elizabeth does. What else? Okay, so the whole taxation without representation. I think I mentioned it. What's like one of the main acts that got people really upset? Stamp Act. Any other benefits? After the colonies do get their independence, what are some byproducts then of United States government that we could point to? Okay. So, Constitution, Bill of Rights. Amendments keep getting added to it. This is a document that is fluid, in flux. Things change all the time. So far as the government, mentioning monarchy, how is it set up? This is more of, I guess, a civics questions or American government questions, but we would say we have C and B within the government, as opposed to that one main ruler. We have checks and balances. You have the different branches: legislative branch, judicial branch. What am I forgetting? Executive branch, I believe. A long time. Now, obviously, this brainstorming is taking longer because we're talking about something as a whole group and class. But compared to, all right, American Revolution is a prime example as to why disobedience and rebellion are a good thing for social progress. Because we're now free and we're in a good country. That's all I have to say about that, quoting Forrest Gump. Now I move on to the next example. Whereas if I'm going, look what happened because of the American Revolution. The idea of independence and freedom actually took root. You now have groups of people who recognizes that government progress needs to take place to move into a system where there's democracy, so the whole taxation without representation does not become a problem. And to protect those rights, they make sure that the Constitution gets created with the Bill of Rights, with the idea that it can be amended throughout the course of history so that as times change, people's progress will continue to keep up with this document, but just to make sure that we don't have a tyrant come in, checks and balances also kind of gets incorporated with it. Will all of those things make it into that one paragraph? Who knows? It kind of depends. But you can see the amount of detail, and by having this amount of detail, what do you inherently have to do? Because if you're going Stamp Act, what do you have to do for your reader? Explain what the Stamp Act is. Explain how checks and balances works. That's going to be the reasoning that will ultimately lead to the claim. Now, Abby's concern early on at the beginning was, but sometimes this could go too much, too far. Why is the French Revolution, for those familiar with it, in your mind, not a good rebellion that would take place? I mean, because that one terrifies Europe, at the time, pretty synonymous so far as, years with this one. Aiden?
Well, for one thing, a lot of people died. And they also.
But they died here too.
They didn't really succeed in their, original goals. They were went to different phases of it, and they just ended up going in a circle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to give you a chance to kind of recap in your mind, the sheer brutality of it.
Yeah.
This is and I don't mean that we're going into history class all of a sudden, but we sort of are. This begins off more as a diplomatic revolution, I guess, where it's really in some ways ruling class against ruling class, whereas French Revolution, probably more that mob mentality, just a giant uprising. So more brutal and also certainly more chaotic in nature would certainly be one thing. You want to add any?
They started out with a monarchy, and then they, as new people, became the new rulers after the nations got rid of them too, and in the end they ended up with the kings.
So you still kind of end up with Emperor Bonaparte. What happens when you throw a hand grenade in the kitchen? You get linoleum blown apart.
Just
Good call, by
we've never succeeded like exactly. Originally they were going after the monarchy people, but they let us come along and started guillotining everybody who was doing some other things. So it never really did anything
The first thing, and I don't even remember who said this so far, is independence and freedom. What was the goal with the American Revolution? Independence and freedom. And certainly U.S. history has its ups and downs, but that's been pretty consistent throughout. French Revolution, maybe independence and freedom, but it probably starts to shift into power. Just want to feel in charge. So the intent behind the disobedience and the rebellion certainly changes things. And that could be a point, Abby, that you can kind of go with. American Revolution, civil rights movement. What's the point behind it? The improvement of quality of life. People being treated fairly. Other movements where people will simply just rebel out of hatred, out of persecution, that is certainly going too far because progress is not being made. So part of your argument certainly can be the ways in which these movements have been beneficial. You can also use examples of movements that have gone too far in the wrong direction as a way to build up your argument. These folks didn't do it correctly, but here's why. The whole gain, the goal, was more maybe selfish in nature as opposed to the equality of all people. So those are ways certainly in which you can take a look at it. But the big thing with the prompt itself, so we can actually see it, is you are going to be responsible for coming up with the ideas. Now, the prompts are set up so that any person should be able to answer them. You don't have to be an APUSH to answer this. I know a lot of people are going, well, that's what we're kind of studying right now. But if you're not taking APUSH, you can still answer it. Notice who is our writer that we're getting referenced at. Oscar Wilde. Nationality. So it's not meant to be a prompt solely for United States of America. You can look at this on a global scale. Again, you can look at this in a historical scale. You can look at it in a modern scale. It's up to you as to which those examples are going to be appropriate. a good blend is going to be probably having historic and current things going on. Personal. Not that you're starting a French Revolution, although I never know. Anything is guillotine. Can you think of any personal examples, whether it be you or things that would be going on for a typical high school student, where yeah, you can see that being the case? Rebellion leads to social progress.
French flag revolution.
That was a big moment.
In Northwest history.
How many years ago was that now?
What happened?
You were youngin' back then.
Freedom
Oh,
fries.
yeah.
Like something changed and it
The French fry revolution was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I would say at this point. It was a two-part revolution, lack of salt, which was federal regulation, and also ranch dressing was changed. It became much more watered down. So one of the movements that, I mean, literally did take place, what did students, hold on, we still got time, we got like 3 minutes. What did students stop doing? Buy lunch. What did they do? Pack their own. So you couldn't really do a whole lot about the salt because of the federal regulations that were going on. The ranch dressing did get changed a little bit. They did kind of go back to the old formula. The big cookie revolution never took place the way that I thought it was going to, because we had the giant cookie, and now we just have the little things. But within current culture, I think it was today's paper, a student in Virginia, former student, graduated last year, is suing his school for, I think it was like $1 million. It's a private school in Virginia. I think it was a private Christian school. For homecoming, male student wanted to bring male. Same-sex relationship, I want to bring significant other, school said no. Returned to school after homecoming, but did not feel that he was being treated equally or the same as any of the other students because of this situation that took place. So he removed himself from school, finished online schooling, so graduated but did not graduate with classmates, in college now, but now he's suing the school. With the whole idea that, that not being treated equally fairly as other students have been. Regardless of, position on that whole issue that's taking place, what is he trying to accomplish? Progress, recognition, equality for all people. It's a simple example. It's like a regional one when it comes to Cannon McMillan and the lunch line, but it is still a way in which you can incorporate these ideas. It doesn't have to be in a historical textbook or in the New York Times front page section to be relevant. What makes it relevant is how you explain, how you reason that evidence is going to be worthwhile and effective. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. If you are fearful of something like American Revolution, civil rights being too common, that's not a problem so long as your explanation is detailed. That's